Welcome back to the Fierce Freedom Podcast. I'm Kat Morgan.
I'm Mark Halverson.
And we have a really, always, but we have a really exciting and special guest with us today. So we have Ashley Jameson, and she is the Associate Director of Women's Groups and Special Projects Director for Pure Desire Ministries.
Yeah, since 2015, Ashley's been on staff at Pure Desire Ministries, helping churches launch groups for individuals struggling with compulsive sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. She's personally experienced teen pregnancy, sex and love addiction, and betrayal trauma. Ashley became frustrated with the generic church responses, suggesting that everything would improve if she just had more faith. Unafraid to tackle difficult topics, she advocates for the voiceless and creates safe spaces for honest, vulnerable conversations within the Christian community. Her work empowers others to break free from addiction and shame, build healthy intimacy, and embrace the life God has for them.
Just snaps all around. So she is a certified pastoral sex addiction professional and is trained in the multidimensional partner trauma model, which I'm really excited to get into with you, Ashley. She's also a contributing author to Unraveled, Betrayal and Beyond, and Authentically You. She co-hosts the podcast. So here we have another podcast you guys got to go check out. UnFiltered, real talk about sex and love, where she and co-host Heather have candid, no judgment conversations about sex, relationships, and healing. So with that, welcome to the podcast, Ashley. We're so thankful to have you here today.
Yeah, I feel honored to be a guest. I'm really excited to unpack this topic today with you guys.
Yeah. So that sounds like a really awesome podcast that you have. I feel like this is kind of a unspoken thing that we do at Fierce Freedom, but every February, since it's Valentine's Day, we do like to kind of have guests on that are talking about relationships and sex and sexuality. And it feels like that's really a favorite for people to discuss, because I think that so often it is, we sometimes talk about sex trafficking in the lens of what shouldn't you do, what shouldn't you do. And I think that talking about, healthy sexuality, like let's paint a picture of what it could look like,
Yeah.
let's talk about what we're for, is something we need to always be
In
thinking
reading
about.
your bio, Ashley, I was really resonating with the part where it said Ashley became frustrated with the generic church responses. And I
Mhm.
wonder if that would be
Yeah.
something we could start at there. So,
Yeah, I know even when I submit that to people, I'm like, I hope I don't offend anybody, but people who know me, I am like, let's talk about this. Like, let's rip the covers off. Let's, be real
yes,
because
yes.
I
Yeah.
really, in my own life, I didn't have anybody to help me integrate what it looked like to be a person who loves God with all my heart and who has made mistakes sexually or experienced abuse. And so those were just two separate categories. And I thought it had to be one person at church, but I was struggling desperately in this area and begging God to help me and but didn't feel safe enough in the church to ask those questions. And it's because there's either a lack of conversation or the what you hear is stay pure, stay a virgin. It's black
Mhm.
and white. It's either you do or don't. And there wasn't a lot of conversations about, hey, men and women, these struggles are common and they have been here from the beginning of time and there's nothing new under the sun. And church should be a safe place to unpack all issues without shame. And um,
Mm.
and so that really just made me feel like why didn't anybody tell me this? Why did I have to learn the hard way through abuse and through my own sexual and, love addiction and getting pregnant as a teenager? And I do feel God rescued me with my twin boys. They are now 21 years old.
Hmm.
But
Wow.
when I was pregnant with them as a senior in high school, it was like, I'm going back to church. My babies are going to be raised knowing Jesus. But I had to find the biggest church I could find and just sneak into the back aisle because the shame was so
Hmm.
just heavy. And so navigating that and then my own betrayal with doing it right and marrying a Christian husband the second time and then finding out, oh, he has a past with prostitutes and he looks at porn. There is no formula to this Christian life. I can't figure it out. Um, that's what
Wow.
made me just be like,
Hmm.
I will be a torchbearer. I will say, there is help, there is hope. You do not have to wander around the bookstore trying to find resources or hide in the back aisles of the
Hmm.
church. I'm at least going to be a safe person for other Christians.
Right. It's so
Mm.
huge. As we record this with you, uh, we've got a men's conference. It's called the No Regrets Men's Conference. Good conference. Been promoting it a lot on our local Christian radio station. It'll be nationwide locations, and it originates out of a church in southeastern Wisconsin. But one of the lead speakers last year And I think your husband was there in person.
Mhm.
Yeah. But basically, he had said only 7% of churches have any kind of group for people struggling with porn. And I'm like, wow. I
No,
mean,
no.
if it's a giant problem that more than a third of pastors struggle with, and there's only 7% of them got a group, I mean, to me, that speaks exactly to what you're talking about. Like, we like to think we've made progress, but I think there's still so far to go.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that, that's probably out of the study that Barna did with Josh McDowell, 2016, I think. I'm really bad with dates. Ish. And so Pure Desire, my organization, just recently partnered with Barna last year, and we have new results. We're like, we can't wait to see. There's more podcasts, there's more web, material, there's more content for people. People are talking about it more, but that number of churches that have programs only increased to 10%.
Mm.
And
Mm.
the Christian men who are still struggling with pornography is 75% Christians and 40% of women. So women are increasing. They are the fastest growing demographic. And I feel like you do. I'm like, what if we're operating a church and we have 75% of our men and 40% of our women showing up using high or drunk or had just experienced domestic abuse or they all lost their child? I mean, the trauma that comes from sexual addiction, compulsive sexual behaviors, pornography use, and betrayal is only second after the death of a loved one when you rank it in America. And so we've got all these people that are either struggling or experiencing the betrayal trauma in our church, and we
Mm.
don't have enough going on for it.
It's so good we're talking about this. And I think that, like you mentioned, I think in church spaces, and we're not trying to rag on the church, but I think that we need to really have that kind of mirror being reflected of like what is happening now and where can we go from here?
Yeah.
Because we can make those changes. And I think also in the world you have, so as you mentioned, there's sort of this continuum of let's not talk about it, let's pretend it doesn't exist. And then in the rest of the world, I've heard people say, well, I feel like my partner wants to watch porn and that's normal and I have to just kind of get over it. And they're kind
Yeah.
of suppressing some of their own emotional health so that they can just be compliant. And it's just so, again, seen as not a big deal. So I think there is that tension that exists that we need to talk about it in a healthy way, not minimize it, because I think people just maybe don't know how to handle it. And so they
Yeah.
they just
Yeah.
feel like, yeah, they go either way, it feels like.
Well, and you guys referenced it earlier that if a third or more of pastors are struggling or have a history with it, and you're our church leaders, if you haven't dealt with the shame, not just sobriety, because some pastors or leaders will get sober and they'll find freedom from the acting out, but they never break through the shame. And I wholeheartedly believe that happens in community, peer-to-peer groups, in support groups where you're able to talk about your story and that shame diminishes by sharing our burdens with each other. And so if we have pastors that are, oh, let's not get too close to that conversation because it feels too close at home, that's one issue. The majority of our church leaders are men. So then you have women who don't know who to go to if they're the ones struggling and they are becoming high porn users. The other side, like you said, a fear of opening Pandora's box. Like, we struggle to get volunteers in the nursery. How are we going to start talking about this and have enough volunteers to help in this area? Or lack of, I don't want to say knowledge, but it's we try to separate science and Bible. And I those church answers that I got frustrated with were read your Bible more, pray more. And I had read my entire Bible that summer of discovery. I had read 50 to 70 chapters a day when I found out my husband's passed. And I was still getting, are you sure you're reading your Bible enough? Are you sure you're trusting God? And so after a while, when I was still dealing with this trauma and my own struggles and coping, I was like, well, there must be something wrong with my faith because I'm doing all the things they're telling me to do. So what's wrong with me that it's not working?
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I started incorporating the clinical part of that with scripture and understanding God made my brain this way. So when he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, there is actually something called neuroplasticity, which physically our brain can change. And so all those verses of take your thoughts captive and doing these things to protect my mind and heart started taking on a whole new meaning when I can envision my brain is actually restructuring and this pain I'm feeling will lessen over time, and just being able to incorporate all of God's truth and not just give these spiritual bypass answers that are often well-meaning, but they can be very damaging to people.
Mm-hmm.
I think of something that the recovery community says across the board, as you've talked about other potential addictions, but the idea of we get well around the truth. But if in the church we're just it's pretense and image, we're not getting to the bottom. And that's what I
Right.
sense with you,
Yeah.
whether it was that bio or in the 10 minutes we've talked to you, is you're somebody who's serious about let's get down to brass tacks so you can change, your husband can experience transformation. And here's the deal. I mean, in terms of the church, that's what we want for everybody. I mean, that's the
Yes.
whole point of Romans
Yeah.
12, like you mentioned. So
Well, and what you're saying, so I love God. My whole life revolves around God. If God tells me something and I feel that's coming from him, you better believe I'm trying to do it, because I have learned the hard way too many years. I love the Lord. I love the church. That's why what we do at Pure Desire, my role in my associate director of women's groups role is to support the church, to help them have content, material, videos.
right.
We love the church. And also, we want to protect people from church harm, church trauma. When you go to a counselor, a church therapist, and you're met with blame, shame, are you sure you're having sex with your husband enough? Are you sure you're bouncing your eyes enough? I mean, these things that don't help, then it creates layers that are unnecessary. And so when I hear people say, "Well, you just need Jesus," I actually 100% agree with that. My problem was I didn't know that there were all these things along my path that put blinders on me or started making me see things through a different filter that kept me from understanding who I fully was in Jesus. And so it does circle back around to your identity in Christ and knowing that you belong and knowing you're valued and knowing he is everything and leads you everywhere. But what group and resources and our ministry does is help you unpack, where did you stop believing that? Where did you start believing a lie that was put on you? Where did trauma block you from being able to live in that truth of God?
Mm. Well, and there's just too many stories, and I myself have experienced that where you take your kind of bleeding heart and you take it to somebody who's, supposed to be a safe person in the church, and they don't know what to do with it. They give you those maybe easy answers of, "Oh, you should read your Bible more. Have you looked in the Bible?" And as you said, that's not the case. And so I think it's about becoming a safer person, and I think that we need to reflect on ourselves in that too. And maybe our own trauma, maybe our own suppressed, you talked about that, like sobriety is not enough. We need to go deeper than that. And I totally agree, because the byproduct, and I think Justin Smith, who we've had on the podcast, who recommended Pure Desire Ministries to us, use that analogy of the, uprooting this, getting to the root, like you're talking about. And because then something good can grow, you have to replace it. But you have to do that really hard work first. And I think, as we've kind of been talking about, I think again, and like we love the church, but we also hold the tension of there's a lot of survivors that look for help in the church, and they are actually like traumatized, as you said, in a different way.
Yeah.
And not getting the help that they could be having, because they're turning to somebody who's of faith that should be a safe person.
Yeah, and you know what? To encourage church leaders, it does not take much to just have the basic equipment to be a safe person for somebody. We have so many resources to help you. You don't have to be an expert. Just be a safe landing place and be somebody that can point them to resources, because in the latest Barna report, it also says that 74% of practicing Christians feel like they have nobody to help them avoid pornography use. And if we know that stepping outside of your marriage or pornography is a sexual sin that leads to then a biological addiction, a biological struggle and issue, then we as Christians should be ready to help people, because we know that it's such a tempting thing, and we know that it's such an easy trap to fall into because how addictive it is. And so I don't want to hear that 74% of Christians feel like they have nobody helping them avoid pornography use. We can do better than that.
Mm-hmm.
It's addictive. And then also, as we've talked about here, even on recent show, I mean, the isolation and shame it creates, right? And then so That's why I just had a men's group last night. We had 10 guys. I call the group the Not Lone Rangers men's group. I know it's an
Yeah.
odd name, but every
Yeah.
time as I look around, there's 10 guys that are not just home in front of a screen, be it a TV, a laptop, their phone, what have you. They're together and we're in the Word praying, having fellowship. And as
Mm.
geeky as it sounds, we close, we put our arms all around each other, shoulder to shoulder, and we say all for one and one for all. And it's just cool, you know? And, but our church also has started having a Pure Desires type of group and have had that book actually featured in the past. So I'm just curious, like, can you tell us more about Pure Desire Ministries, what you have for men and women and what's available?
Sure. Well, we have plenty of clinicians that do virtual appointments all over the world. And so if you are a man or a woman or a couple struggling, we do have clinicians. I feel like our bread and butter resource, like I said, you can do counseling, but to break shame, I think you need community, exactly what you just described with your guys. That's what starts to break down shame and that you're fully accepted and fully known. And so our groups are in churches. We have groups in it at least 1,200 churches all over the world.
Right.
And we have about 100 online groups running at any given time. And so if you don't have it, you can go to our map and you can plug your zip code in and find a local church that has a group. If that doesn't work, then you can go online. And in those groups, we have betrayal groups to process that betrayal. And we have groups for men, women, young, single, college age men and women who are struggling with love, sex, relationship. And we don't specifically call it a pornography addiction group because, like you're saying about the roots, we believe that sexual acting out is just a symptom of something. And so we have guys in there for all kinds of reasons, illegal activity, um, prostitution, pornography use, and they'll go through this 8 to 10 month resource. It's long because we feel like if one sermon or one message did it, then we wouldn't be where we're at, right? Because it escalates and it takes hold, and you need to have the time to be able to renew those pathways and create new behaviors. And so we put people in a closed group, start to finish, they're with the same 7, 8 people. And we walk alongside them, incorporating the tools and biblically based, clinically proven. We use all of that in our groups. So, and then we also have a new parent training course because we feel like sometimes that's an easier conversation for the church to have is, hey, let's offer this parent training course. And then that might stir conversation for the parents. And we just recently created a youth leader library, which is free, and it has well over 20 resources. We have 3 to 5 minute videos of what do you do when a teenager comes to you, one of your students, and says, I'm struggling with porn. And so instead of the answers that, some of my students got of, oh, just pray the armor of God over you. And why are you here again? We already talked about this. You can actually give them good wisdom and even videos of what's happening when you're struggling with porn and masturbation in your brain and in your body. So we equip the pastors and the youth leaders with that information as well.
I'd love for you to share more about that betrayal trauma resource because I think that that's something, again, we had a conversation that is airing this month and really to hear the wife's perspective or even the spousal perspective and really as they shared, torched their marriage. And so, can you share about what that process might look like for somebody that's just looking for support as they are looking at what those pieces of the broken marriage might look like?
Yeah. What I love about our Betrayal and Beyond group, and that again is 8 to 10 months, just as long for the betrayed spouse, because we want to unpack everything, give tools, boundaries, voice, understanding, help them understand what's going on in the addict brain and how it gets hijacked and behaviors. And one of the stats says that only 46% of women feel like they're recovered from their spouse's sexual behaviors. And that's sad because what I see happen is they may get past the initial shock and like create a plan, or maybe he goes and gets help, she doesn't, or vice versa. If it's the wife that has an affair or is using pornography and he doesn't get help, then the marriage kind of stays stuck. And the betrayed spouse is not to blame, but it does impact them. And it's just like being in a car accident of you may have gotten injured and you're not to blame, but you need to go get that broken leg fixed, or you need to go get help as well. And so we help them understand that betrayal trauma is a real thing, that betrayal is something that they don't have to minimize. They don't have to feel like they're overreacting. They don't have to feel crazy. And giving them that language and that support to help them process through that. And even with people who are considering divorce, I'm like, just wait, just put it on pause and go through this, because your brain is going haywire. It's looking for survival when something like that happens, when the person you enter into a covenant with or you enter into commitment with and they betray you in that way, the whole world all of a sudden feels unsafe, because you felt like, I knew this person intimately in a way I don't know anybody else. And if this person could have fooled me and betrayed me, my whole world is unsafe. And it just knocks betrayed spouses on their face. They're totally devastated when they come to us.
We might have asked this earlier, but and you made some references to your story and your husband's story. I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more on that journey for you and him and you guys together.
Yeah, so we've now, I mean, our discovery day happened at year 4, and we've been married for 15 years now, and we both have led groups. And I will say, I cry every time. I cry about everything. Anytime you ask me a story about a person, I'm gonna cry. But it's radically changed our parenting, even the way we do relationship with our parents and our siblings and our friends. I wish we would have had this information early on, because like I said, we both had a past we brought into the marriage. I thought we're doing it right, so it should be fine. He thought, I don't want to tell her what I'm struggling with because I don't want to lose her. And it just, our world exploded. And so when we got that Christian church answers and it wasn't working, we started praying that God would just bring us resources that could actually help us. And it was within a month that we moved, got a job transfer, started at a new church. And I had told my family, we moved on a Saturday. I said, we're not falling off the church wagon. We're going to church tomorrow. I don't care how tired everybody is. We're going to that church right there down the street. And we sat down and they said, we're starting something brand new and it's called Pure Desire. And it was groups for men.
Wow.
And through that, I mean, I gently kicked my husband into group. And through that, I started the women's groups there. I was a mess. I started them when I was a mess. But that's where I say, I know that these church leaders do not have to be experts or have all the answers. They just have to have somebody that's willing to open the space and say, I'm right there too, or I've been there too, and let's have a safe space to talk about it. And so that then brought me into my work at Pure Desire and wanting to make sure that I can help as many couples like us. And I mean, the biggest thing for me, I love my husband to pieces, but also he's a grown man. The biggest thing for me is that my children and the way we raise them, they were impacted by our healing and our understanding, this new understanding of God and the way he views people that are struggling or broken or hurting. We get to raise our kids now in a different environment of saying it's okay to come to us with anything. It's okay to talk about anything. So
That's really powerful. Just a brief follow-up on that, because I was struck by you saying this new idea of the way God sees people who are struggling. So with all due respect, talk to me about what you feel is kind of the old church religious way that you think people get the idea. Steve Brown says, God's not mad at you. So, so I'm just curious if you could contrast the old with what is that new way?
yeah. And I love God. I love the church. And I always am like, how do I say this without hurting stepping on anybody's toes?
It's a
But
safe
I'm
thing to say.
also just like, why didn't anybody tell me this? And so for me, it was just his graciousness and patience. Like, yes, there's consequences. Yes, there's discipline and there's consequences when we do things that are out of line. And I used to think when people would say, God is a God of love, and that's what really matters, I'd be like, that is a little bit too hippy dippy for me. We need to also know that there's consequences. But then going through this full circle journey of my own and realizing, trying to follow a list of do's and don'ts and trying to just live by this behavior modification lifestyle of, okay, give me the list of Christian things to do, was killing me. And it was actually separating me from God. And when I landed on my face, because when my husband betrayed me, I was like, I have nobody to trust but God. I guess it's just me and you, God. And I clinged to him. And when I realized he is so good. He is not afraid of our brokenness, and he sees us the way we see our kids. So if I see my toddler learning and growing and falling and stumbling, I don't get mad that they keep falling. I know they're on a journey, and I see the little toddler's heart and mind and desire to want to be different. And I do believe that God saw my husband in that. And even when I was living in my addictions, he saw that we wanted to, but we did not have the resources. We did not know how to do it. And so I just think he's more gracious. And even after I had to have a divorce from my first husband because it was so toxic and unsafe, and I never heard a Christian tell me that God was okay with boundaries. I mean, I did hear if they physically hit you or had a physical affair, you're allowed to leave. Any reason outside of that, you're not allowed to leave. And it wasn't until I got into the scripture for myself when it says in Jeremiah that, God gave Israel a certificate of divorce. And I'm thinking, this God has boundaries and he is fierce and he is loving, and all of this new revelation of how God sees me, not the way the church taught me, but how I discovered for myself by being in his word and going and having him walk me through these difficulties, gave me a love for him so big now that I'm like, I want to do everything and anything to please you. And I'm like, this is what it means to understand how much God loves you, that your desire to please him is just there because you love him so much and you know he has your best interests. And that just all came through that hardship we navigated.
Yeah, it's a response to really, I think, fully realizing how loved we are, because I agree. I think for me, on my spiritual journey through, the things that I go through, I have to sort of rewire. Like, you have to let God speak into that, because I think some of us think of shame as like a motivating voice. I don't know if anyone can relate to that,
Yes.
but it's like
Oh, yes.
helps you kind of do the right thing. But actually, I've learned that that loving voice and that invitation of Abba, and seeing you as like his beloved child, like that image you shared of him seeing us stumble and just want to keep going forward, is so, I think, true to him. And thank you for sharing that, because it's something that I think we lose sight of, because shame is so loud, and we internalize that so much. And so I'm just so glad that this exists. And like you're saying, I feel like you are planting seeds because of your own experience and maybe what you didn't have. And even for your children and whoever you're helping, they're taking back that ground, and it really is making a difference. Exploitation can completely affect, and set, and there's so much damage that can be done. But what's happening here is a completely different way that is also, creating healing on a like a large scale, and
Mhm.
kind of reversing that damage. So I just see that vision of just the beautiful seeds being planted in this fertile ground. That's like, let's take out, the shame and everything that's been there that's prevented that from taking root.
Huh.
Mhm. Yeah, I had one of my teenage girls, my students, tell me she looks at like social media, girls on social media, so that she can body shame herself into being skinny, or
Dang.
that shame being a motivator. And then I've had other people that are saying, we like the churches with more fire and brimstone because it scares us straight. And I'm like, but you're here. That's not working for you. You keep going back. And I've been there. I know how it felt to white knuckle things for a year and then fall off the wagon. And it's like you're not living fully free and healthy. And I used to think I need to go study this corner of ministry so I can become a minister and share the gospel. And I would be chasing after these things to try to be what I thought I was supposed to be as a Christian. And when I finally just surrendered and I'm like, I'm a mess, and God did all the work in me and my husband, now I have this joy, I have this story, I have this testimony where I can say I've overcome him by the blood of the lamb and the word of my testimony. And I just want to share it. I want to go spread the good news of what God can do.
Huh. Ashley, you're wonderfully, refreshingly real, and that's fantastic. And so I appreciate everything you've shared. We said in the bio, you're a certified pastoral sex addiction professional and trained in multidimensional partner trauma model. So what does that mean in layman's terms exactly?
Layman's terms, it means I have studied and been trained on understanding addiction, and as a religious professional, I can incorporate my knowledge with my Christian values and help people. And so that's the PSAP training. And then the other side is through an organization called ABSATS. It's also a mouthful, but the whole organization is all about understanding betrayal trauma, partner sensitive approaches to things. And so for a long time, we had Patrick Carnes, who's the guru of sexual addiction recovery, and our founder, Dr. Ted,
Ted
many
Roberts.
years ago. Yes, Dr. Ted Roberts, many years ago, studied under Patrick Carnes and said, this is amazing knowledge. Would you mind if I took it and incorporated my biblical perspective over this clinical data and approach that he had to healing? And so that's where Pure Desire's material is a combination of clinical proven steps to recovery and that biblically informed. And then on the other side, Dr. Steffens founded ABSATS, and about, it might be 14 years ago now, more research about the betrayed spouse and how they actually can be traumatized started coming out. And so let me give you an example. If, let's say, you do have a pastor or a counselor who's informed on sexual addiction. They happen to be informed. Maybe they're one of the 10% that has something going on. And you have a couple that comes in and they're in crisis. Well, if let's say it's my husband and I, if John has had years, decades of hiding his behavior from me and manipulating and deceiving me and hiding, I had no idea all this was going on. And I'm just finding out. My world has been turned upside down. You get us in the office. He's well-spoken. He knows how to explain what's going on. And I'm in crisis. Somebody could think, oh, I'm overreacting, or I just need to forgive and move on. They don't understand the betrayal trauma. And so that's why we have the two organizations. I think they're both so important for helping our couple.
That's great. I love the clinical modality and neuroscience that is part of this. Like you kind of touched on that earlier. Because this isn't just a moral argument. This is a scientific, there's so much data to support this.
Yeah. And two of my favorite, I already touched on, be transformed by the renewing of the mind and how that took hold for me when I understood. We have a slide that we show in some of our conferences where we'll put a brain on cocaine next to a brain on pornography, and they're equally holy. They're equally damaged. Exactly the same. Some say the pornography brain is even worse. And so, but when you see that somebody can go through therapeutic treatment and they can get the right help, you can rescan that brain and see that it's starting to fill back out. And so when God says we can be transformed by the renewing of our mind, or even with epigenetics, when I heard that, when you hear the verse that the sins of the father would be passed down to the third and fourth generation, I used to think, oh, that's just because they watch you. They watch you and they learn, which is a huge part of it. But also, when we have habitual behaviors, we change the way that our DNA sends messages, and that now can be seen to the third and fourth generation on scans. And so, but then the flip side, God can totally renew that and heal and bring life. But all these scriptures and being able to see that science can now prove that what the Bible said was right all along.
Yeah, amen.
Shortly before the podcast, I went to puredesire.org and I see it says, got the report, get the church toolkit. Talk to us about the church. Does that include this latest study that you did then? The church toolkit?
Yeah, the study itself is available. It's through Barna, but we have a link on our website, and so I actually have it right here. Mine's kind of torn up because I'm hard on my books. But this is the report, and you can purchase it on our website. It's got all kinds of infographics. All of the stats I've been sharing today are in there, and then we have tons of resources then to equip a church depending on which route they want to go and what they feel like their need is. And so we might, like I said, we might have a church that wants to start with the youth because that seems like low entry. We have our sexual integrity 101 where a church can just say, hey, church, this is a problem. We read this report and we want to do something. We're not telling you to raise your hand. We're showing this video course for everybody. Just come and be equipped and educated. And I will just say too, email us at, puredesire.org, go to the website and you can email us at groups@puredesire.org or just our main, website and put in put in an inquiry. We have a whole team and we love supporting people, whether you're an individual, a church, a counselor. We have people that can get on a Zoom call with you and say, okay, where are you starting? What do you have to work with? And we can help you form a game plan.
Mm, that's so good. Have there been any so obviously the data doesn't lie. You talked about the brain scans and the changing of your mind and the renewing of your mind, but has there been anything you've seen personally, obviously like specific details aside with these cases, but even in your own life or in the lives of other people that has kind of inspired you in the work?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's endless stories of so one story I had is an older couple and they had been married for a really long time. She came to me, well, the pastor said, I got a hot one coming for you. And I was like 1 year into leading this group. I'm like, oh my God, I just was like 30-year-old, like nothing, no education, and she was the one where I said, if you just put it on pause, put the divorce. She said, my house is on the market. I've kicked him out. I'm getting divorced, but the pastor wanted me to talk to you. And I said, just pause. There's no danger in taking a 1 year pause because even if you decide divorce is the best option for you, you will be better off not being in trauma and processing through this. So, long story short, they ended up renewing their vows. They're still together all these years later. And so we see stories like that all of the time because there's lack of understanding. And that's what hurts my heart so much is that we see these marriages that end because they just parted ways or lost interest or lost love for each other. And it's like, I bet you anything there was underlying things that they didn't have tools for that they could have. And then on a brain side, when my like for the betrayal side, when my husband went on his first fire assignment, which he can be gone for weeks, I remember that first assignment that he went on where he came back and said, how are you doing? How were your triggers? And I was like, I didn't have any. I was so excited I could have ran around my house and screamed that I was able to just be free of that because I had continued to do these processes. Just like if you're learning to drive with your left hand or write with your left hand, and eventually it clicks and it starts to feel like it's not a struggle anymore. And then our podcast talks about sex and love. So sometimes we work with the people post betrayal. They've done all the work and now they're like, how do we reintegrate sexually in a healthy way? And
Good.
that can be a real challenge for men and women when you've trained yourself this way. If you've looked at porn, and it leads to sex trafficking and it can escalate and lead to all these things to have to come all the way back, from wherever you ended up and reset and learn how to be aroused and attracted to your spouse again. And so those are also success stories for me when we get to work with a couple and we get to bring them all the way back to loving and pursuing and being attracted to their spouse again.
So good.
I'm just curious as we wind down. We mentioned earlier you co-host the Unfiltered podcast, Real Talk about Sex, Love. Can you kind of give us kind of an overview of that, or when people have thoroughly listened to the Fierce Freedom podcast, if they have time to listen to another podcast, why should they check out Unfiltered?
Yeah, Heather and I, my co-host, we've been traveling together the whole time we've worked here, so 9 years, and we co-write a lot of the resources. And in those conferences, we've met with thousands and thousands of women, and we would get these questions, quiet questions, card written questions, and so we decided that this podcast was going to be all listener driven and we want them to have a safe place to ask their questions because we can only we can only produce a new resource every so often, a new book, a new workbook, but the podcast they can submit their questions and we can answer them. So we make them bite sized. They're less than 20 minutes usually. And we answer 3 questions on each podcast and they're all submitted from listeners.
Great.
I love that. Great idea.
Mm-hmm.
We do long form conversation for our podcast. My husband's like, I like that. I'm like, I hope people like it. But anyway,
Yeah, our main Pure Desire podcast is like that. We interview guests in their hour segments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so there's a couple different things.
There's 2.
So it sounds like there's quite a few resources, and I'd love to kind of close on that. But I would love to hear from you, Ashley. What do you dream about happening through the work that you're doing?
Oh, 2 things. if I can only pick two.
You can pick
Um,
whatever. Yeah, however you want.
We're
two
long
would
form.
be,
We are.
yeah, it would be that we as people and parents and husbands and wives and men and women would grasp the seriousness of equipping ourselves before crisis, that we would be willing to have more proactive steps with understanding, avoiding these traps in the first place. That would be like, okay, this would be one world peace. That's what I hope for. But on the other side, I want the work that we do, the work that you guys do, to be so well known to Christians with such little shame around the topic that immediately when somebody starts to struggle, they know exactly where to go. They're not searching for resources or searching for a safe person, but they know exactly where to go. I mean, at least as much as AA, right? We all know who to call and where to go if you're struggling with alcohol or something else. And so to get the word out there for people.
So
It
good.
kind of fits in. I just think about what my dream has been as it with Fierce Freedom from the outside and early radio interviews with the original founder up to this day, co-hosting with Kat, but just to see more churches, and if not churches, there are other, 12-step groups, what have you, but to just have that demand side. If there's no demand, there's no human trafficking. But unfortunately, we know there is demand. And so, and porn just is like gasoline poured on that.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess, speaking to that vision and that dream, while also talking about the fact that the spiritual battle that this is, right? It's intense.
Yeah, absolutely. I am right there with you. Just the way that it escalates and the way that it's tainting the view of people and how what their expectations are in a relationship, the violence, the rape porn that people are starting to search. I mean, we used to have to stumble across porn under a bridge or under a mattress, and now it's coming at you like a hailstorm. And I feel like a parent, I'm just like those automatic tennis ball feeders, like stop coming to my kids. It's so crazy how exposed we are and what it's doing to the minds of our young and old people. So I
Mhm.
agree. We need to work to reduce that and educate people and equip the church to be more of a helper.
And so while there's been progress from that earlier Barna report to the latest one, you worked with them on from 7 to 10% of churches with groups. Wow. Wouldn't it be great if we saw, all over Western Wisconsin, where Fierce Freedom is located, in Wisconsin and the Midwest, to see more Pure Desire groups and more groups to truly see folks coming into the light, not in that isolation and shame, but we're trying to get the word out through this podcast and organization as you are. So.
Well,
Yes, no more unspoken prayers. Let's speak them.
yes.
I need
Wow.
help in this area.
Yeah, and I'm just, as we're talking, it's like, imagine the church transformed. Like, imagine if this, we have to talk about what could this look like and what we dream about. And I just imagine that if we were not bogged down by this sin, these secret addictions, and just the brokenness involved with this, I mean, think of how we would show up in the world and how we could love the world just like we're meant to.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think it would be amazing. We say, here I am, all of me. I'm ready.
Yes.
How to work? Ask me what you need to ask me.
Yes. People are hungry for that authentic,
Mhm.
connection.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
it's good.
And I think it's great just looking at your church toolkit. I'm going to look forward to hopefully getting a look at this beyond the porn phenomenon and the videos. But you have Julie Slattery, who we hope to get as a guest sometime.
Julie.
Sheila
Dr.
Gregor,
Julie.
Sean McDowell. So great. Yourself as well amongst them.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And on our main Pure Desire podcast, which is called the Pure Desire Podcast, we have an 8-part series with some of those guests with all those guests you just named, plus more.
I'm going to quit my job and just listen to those podcasts.
I think Mark needs to start doing this full time because you're so passionate about it. But anyway, we won't tell your main job. I'm just kidding. But anyway, well, I just want to say thank you, Ashley. And just again, really quickly, like just to sum up, for people that are in this or, betrayal trauma, maybe want to also walk alongside others. Are there, like what's kind of a next step potentially?
Yeah. Wherever you are, we have a step for you. And if it's overwhelming, if you go to our site and it's overwhelming, call us or email us, groups@puredesire.org, if you're interested in starting a group or getting in a group. We have the group leader training course. It's just a video course. We have support groups we have support for our leaders and all kinds of resources. We have our church membership and our individual membership if somebody's wanting to start a group, where we give you all the things you need to start. That Sexual Integrity 101 course, the group leader training, monthly support, coaching. I mean, we've got it. So wherever somebody's starting from, parent, betrayed spouse, addict, church, we have a starting place.
You're not alone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic, Ashley.
Thank you.